This Torah portion contains many layers of meaning and prophecy. The account begins when Pharaoh has two dreams that his magicians cannot interpret. Pharaoh's cupbearer remembers that the prisoner Joseph has the gift of interpreting dreams. When Joseph reveals the meaning of Pharaoh's dreams, Pharaoh elevates him to second in command over his entire kingdom and gives Joseph an Egyptian name. Genesis 41:45. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphnath-Paaneah, and he gave him as a wife Asenath, the daughter of Poti-Pherah, priest of On. So Joseph went out all over the land of Egypt. According to the NKJV Study Bible and others, the name Zaphnath-Paaneah means God speaks and he lives. However, the transliteration of the Egyptian into Hebrew, according to the Jewish Targum Onkelos, sounds like the Hebrew for he who explains the hidden. Both of these understandings for Joseph's Egyptian name sets up the layers of meaning in this Torah portion. God speaks, he lives, and explains the hidden. I'm Brenda Cathcart, and this is Words from Our Father. The Torah portion begins with Pharaoh having a dream that the magicians are unable to interpret. Genesis 41:8. Now it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. And Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was no one who could interpret them for Pharaoh. Joseph is able to interpret the dream and explain the plan to save Egypt from famine. So Pharaoh declares that the Spirit of God is in Joseph. Genesis 41:37 and 38. So the advice was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of all his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, "Can we find such a one as this, a man in whom is the Spirit of God?" Many years later, another Pharaoh will rise to power who did not know Joseph. When his magicians are unable to replicate the plague sent by God through Aaron and Moses, the magicians declare that Aaron and Moses acted through the finger or spirit of God. Exodus 8:19. Then the magicians said to Pharaoh, "This is the finger of God." But Pharaoh's heart grew hard and he did not heed them, just as the Lord had said. The Pharaoh of Joseph's time recognized the actions of God and believed. This resulted in the salvation of his land and people. Ultimately, through him, all of Joseph's family, the children of Israel, would be saved. However, the Pharaoh of Moses' time did not acknowledge the actions of God, resulting in the destruction of the land and people of Egypt. These two different pharaohs bracket Israel's time in Egypt. Joseph was rewarded by Pharaoh for the wise plan God gave to him to prepare for the upcoming famine. In addition to a new name, Joseph is given a wife. During the 7 years of plenty, Joseph's wife bears him 2 sons. The motif of 2 sons that began with the birth of Cain and Abel continues with the birth of Joseph's 2 sons. Joseph names them Manasseh and Ephraim. Genesis 41:51 and 52. Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh, "For God has made me forget all my toil and all my father's house." And the name of the second he called Ephraim, "For God has caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction." From these names, it seems that Joseph has turned his back on his entire family. The name Manasseh, number 4519 in Strong's Concordance, means causing to forget. Joseph declares that God had caused him to forget all his toil and all his father's house. The word toil is the Hebrew word amal, number 5999, meaning a wearing effort, sorrow, toil, trouble, and travail. It can also mean mischief or wickedness. God caused Joseph to forget the trouble and wickedness he endured at the hands of his brothers in his father's house. The Stone Edition Chumash comments on Joseph's ability to forget. Joseph acknowledged that God had allowed him to forget the hardships his brother had inflicted on him in his paternal home. He was able to recognize that everything they had done was part of the divine master plan, and consequently he bore them no ill will. For that he was grateful. Joseph's declaration at the birth of his second-born son, Ephraim, confirms that Joseph had not traded his identity as a son of Israel to become a son of Egypt. Joseph called Egypt the land of his affliction. The fact that God caused him to be fruitful reminds us of God's command to Adam and Noah that they be fruitful and fill the earth. The command was given to Adam after he was exiled from the garden, and to Noah after the flood destroyed the earth. Isaiah writes of a time when the sorrow will not be remembered. Isaiah 65:17 through 19. For behold, I create new heavens and a new earth, and the former shall not be remembered or come to mind. But be glad and rejoice forever in what I create. For behold, I create Jerusalem as a rejoicing, and her people a joy. I will rejoice in Jerusalem and joy in my people. The voice of weeping shall no longer be heard in her, nor the voice of crying. In the book of Revelation, John records the voice in heaven, declaring that the sorrow of the former times will pass away and all things are made new. Revelation 21:4 and 5. And God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There shall be no more death, nor sorrow, nor crying. There shall be no more pain, for the former things have passed away. Then he who sat on the throne said, Behold, I make all things new. And he said to me, Write, for these words are true and faithful. The motif of two sons continues later in the account when Joseph holds Simeon, the second-born son of Leah, as hostage until the brothers bring Benjamin to him. Joseph apparently exonerated Reuben when he overheard Reuben rebuking his brothers for selling him into slavery. Genesis 42:22. And Reuben answered them, saying, Did I not speak to you, saying, Do not sin against the boy, and you would not listen? Therefore, behold, his blood is now required of us. Reuben sees the demand to bring Benjamin into Egypt as the uncovering and consequences of their sin against Joseph. As the oldest son, Reuben would be the one to be held accountable for that sin. However, with Reuben exonerated, the accountability fell on Simeon as the second-born. When the other 9 brothers discovered that the money they paid for the grain was returned to them, they were frightened. Genesis 42:27 and 28. But as one of them opened his sack to give his donkey feed at the encampment, he saw his money, and there it was in the mouth of his sack. So he said to his brothers, My money has been restored, and there it is in my sack. Then their hearts failed them, and they were afraid, saying to one another, What is this that God has done to us? They were faced with a dilemma. If they didn't return to Egypt, Simeon would remain a prisoner. If they returned, they could be accused of stealing and be taken as slaves. The Stone Edition Chumash comments, The self-proclaimed God-fearing viceroy was treating them in a way that would give him an excuse to enslave them. After the 9 brothers return to Canaan and their father Israel, they are faced with famine unless they return to Egypt with Benjamin. Reuben offers the death of his 2 sons in surety of Benjamin's safety. In a sense, Reuben is offering his 2 sons in the place of Rachel's 2 sons, Joseph, who was regarded as already dead, and Benjamin, whom Jacob feared would die in Egypt. Jacob rejects Reuben's offer. Judah, who lost 2 sons and then was granted 2 others through his daughter-in-law Tamar, eventually takes responsibility for Benjamin's safety. Instead of offering death like Reuben did, Judah offered life, that we may live and not die. Genesis 43:8 and 9. Then Judah said to Israel his father, Send the lad with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die, both we and you and also our little ones. I myself will be surety for him. From my hand you shall require him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, then let me bear the blame forever." Notice that Judah speaks to Israel, his father. Israel is the man who held on to the angel of the Lord and wouldn't let go until he prevailed in receiving the blessing. Judah's words remind Israel that he needs to continue to have faith and hold on. In next week's Torah portion, Judah will be called on to fulfill his words to Israel to stand for Benjamin. Returning to the years of plenty, Joseph traveled throughout the land of Egypt, exercising the authority given to him by Pharaoh to take 1/5 of the grain harvest and store it up for the years of famine. He describes the amount of grain collected as the sand of the sea. Genesis 41:49. Joseph gathered very much grain as the sand of the sea until he stopped counting, for it was immeasurable. God uses this same metaphor in his promise to Abraham that his seed would be as many as the sand upon the seashore. Genesis 22:17. Blessing I will bless you, and multiplying I will multiply your descendants as the stars of the heaven, and as the sand which is on the seashore, and your descendants shall possess the gate of their enemies. Jacob reminds God of this promise when he is getting ready to face Esau. Genesis 32:12. For you said, I will surely treat you well and make your descendants as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. The grain Joseph collected is as much or as many as the descendants of Abraham. At one level of understanding, these are the children that will be born to Israel in Egypt. They will be so numerous that the new Pharaoh will fear them. At another level, Joseph, as a type of Messiah, goes throughout Egypt, the Gentile world, and gathers the souls, the spiritual descendants of Abraham. They are as many as the sands of the sea. Yeshua uses the metaphor of grain as souls who are saved in a parable about the harvest of the end times. The good seed produces wheat, which is gathered into the barn. The bad seed produces tares, which are burned in the fire. Matthew 13:37 and 38. He answered and said to them, He who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world. The good seeds are the sons of the kingdom, but the tares are the sons of the wicked one. Literally, the grain that Joseph collects will keep Egypt and his own brothers and their families from dying. It is through the grain or souls collected from the Gentiles that Israel will be saved. Paul writes to the Gentiles about them gaining salvation because the Jews were disobedient. But through the same mercy shown to the Gentiles, the Jews will also receive mercy. Romans 11:30 through 32. For as you were once disobedient to God, yet have now obtained mercy through their disobedience, even so these also have now been disobedient, that through the mercy shown you they also may obtain mercy. For God has committed them all to disobedience, that he might have mercy on all. It was through the disobedience of Joseph's brothers that Joseph was in Egypt to prepare the people for the famine. Both the Egyptians and the children of Israel received grain to sustain their lives through Joseph. Joseph's first dream is actually about this situation. In his dream, his brother's sheaves bow down to his sheaf. Genesis 37:7. There we were binding sheaves in the field. Then behold, my sheaf arose and also stood upright. And indeed, your sheaves stood all around and bowed down to my sheaf. When Joseph's brothers first arrive in Egypt and appear before him to buy grain, they bow before him. Genesis 42:6. Now Joseph was governor over the land, and it was he who sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed down before him with their faces to the earth. Joseph recognized them and remembered his dream. Genesis 42:9. Then Joseph remembered the dreams which he had dreamed about them and said to them, You are spies. You have come to see the nakedness of the land. Joseph's accusations that they are spies may have had some basis from their actions when arriving in Egypt. It is possible that they used the opportunity to carefully inquire about their brother Joseph. The Stone Edition Chumash comments on this possibility. The brothers, knowing that the original purchasers of Joseph had been bound for Egypt, wanted to find him and ransom him. They entered the country through 10 different gates and spread out in the marketplace looking for him. The commentary goes on to explain that Joseph's accusation of them being spies prevented them from persisting in their search for him and thus finding him before he was ready to reveal his identity to them. Joseph quickly forced his brothers out of Egypt, holding only Simeon hostage in surety of their return with Benjamin. When the brothers arrived with Benjamin, Joseph prepared a banquet for them. He sat separated from them and had them seated in the order of their birth. Genesis 43:32-34. So they set him in a place by himself, and set them by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with him by themselves, because the Egyptians could not eat food with the Hebrews, for that is an abomination to the Egyptians. And they sat before him, the firstborn according to his birthright, and the youngest according to his youth. And the men looked in astonishment at one another. Then he took servings to them from before him. But Benjamin's serving was 5 times as much as any of theirs. So they drank and were merry with him. There are several hidden things going on at this banquet. First, Joseph is sitting separate from his brothers, which may be an allusion back to the last meal he shared with his brothers. At that time, Joseph was in a pit, separate from his brothers, while his brothers ate a meal. Second, they were sitting in birth order, which hints at Joseph's knowledge of his brothers, but also may be a reference to the birthright, which was at the heart of the friction between Joseph and his brothers. Finally, Benjamin, the youngest son and full brother of Joseph, is given 5 times the serving size of his brothers. Clearly, Joseph, this supposed Egyptian official, is deliberately favoring the son that he knows is the youngest. How would the brothers react to this favoritism? All these little pieces are a reminder that Jacob favored Joseph over his brothers to inherit the birthright and the promise of Abraham. If that isn't enough, Joseph sets Benjamin up to be accused of stealing his personal cup. The theft of the silver cup would result in Benjamin being taken into slavery. Did Joseph's brothers regard Joseph as if he was stealing the birthright? Genesis 44:2-4. Also put my cup, the silver cup, in the mouth of the sack of the youngest and his grain money. So he did according to the word that Joseph had spoken. As soon as the morning dawned, the men were sent away, they and their donkeys. When they had gone out of the city and were not yet far off, Joseph said to his steward, "Get up, follow the men, and when you overtake them, say to them, 'Why have you repaid evil for good?'" The brothers react with indignation, confident that they were innocent of the charges. They declare that the one who is found with the silver cup be put to death. Genesis 44:9. "With whomever of your servants it is found, let him die, and we also will be my Lord's slaves." The silver cup that was found in Benjamin's sack is identified as one that Joseph uses for divination. In other words, it is used as a household idol to tell the future or reveal hidden motivations. The brothers' rash oath is reminiscent of Jacob's rash oath when Rachel had stolen and hidden her father Laban's idols. Genesis 31:32. "With whomever you find your gods, do not let him live. In the presence of our brethren, identify what I have of yours and take it with you." For Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. Joseph's brothers were more fortunate than Jacob. Joseph's steward did not accept their oath, but instead rephrased it to be that the one who had the silver cup would be Joseph's slave. Again, this is a reminder of Joseph being betrayed by his brothers and sold into slavery. Judah recognizes that all this happened because of their sin against Joseph. It was not the silver cup that revealed their actions, but God. Genesis 44:16. Then Judah said, "What shall we say to my Lord? What shall we speak? Or how shall we clear ourselves? Our God has found out the iniquity of your servants. Here we are, my Lord's slaves, both we and he also with whom the cup was found." Judah, unlike Reuben, cannot be exonerated for selling Joseph. He is the one who came up with the plan to sell Joseph. Judah offers that they, the ones who had sold Joseph into slavery, be taken into slavery along with Benjamin, so Benjamin is not left alone. Our Torah portion ends with Joseph's steward rejecting Judah's offer and declaring that only Benjamin would be held accountable for stealing the silver cup. We are left with the question of what the brothers will do to protect Benjamin and to protect Jacob from having his heart broken once again. Throughout this Torah portion, God speaks. He reveals information about the upcoming sojourn of all the children of Israel in Egypt. He reveals that the sins of the brothers against Joseph had not gone unnoticed. He sets up patterns that will be fulfilled when God sends his son to check on the welfare of his brothers. Like Joseph, God's son will be betrayed by his brothers, but that betrayal will be uncovered. The next Torah portion will reveal that, though the brothers meant their actions for evil, God sent Joseph to preserve their lives, just like God sent his son Yeshua to preserve our lives and the lives of his Jewish brothers. I'm Brenda Cathcart for Moed Ministries International. Shalom and be blessed.